the people are doing. So this comparison, highly anticipated for me, mainly because there are just certain things that I need to confirm without a shadow of doubt. That's the thing, because there are a lot of opinions and thoughts about the Vivo X200 Pro and its main sensor downgrade, and honestly, I had mine as well in the previous comparison. I feel like I should have framed them a little bit better to get my real thoughts across properly, because my real thoughts are this. I don't feel like the main sensor downgrade is that much of a problem in regular use cases when you're just going out there taking photos. So for most people it shouldn't be a concern, but it is still most definitely very, very disappointing that Vivo even went for a main sensor downgrade. Vivo is the very last company that I would expect for such a thing. It's atrocious, to be entirely honest, but still, that's just the way it is. I'm just trying to figure out if it is really a problem or not. So there are three ways that this can go, because you see, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, it has a 1-inch sensor. So comparatively, we should either see that maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is a genuine concern, and maybe it's it makes the main sensor really, really bad and really unusable in various situations. That could happen. It could also be that I'm absolutely right and it isn't a concern on a regular basis. On the spec sheet, obviously it seems bad, and yes, it is definitely a disappointment, but in real world use case it doesn't really do much or doesn't really cause much problems. It could also be a middle ground that I'm thinking is probably going to be the case, because it could be that in certain situations, under certain circumstances, you could have a concerning result from the X200 Pro, but in most cases you're not going to see enough of a difference, or you know the thing about diminishing returns, right? Maybe that's what's going to happen when we try to use the X200 Pro, and the results that we get from the X200 Pro's technically smaller, inferior sensor. It could be either of those three, to be entirely honest. I haven't really seen the comparison photos in their fullest glory, so let's do that right away. Alright then, as per usual, we are starting off with the color profiles. This is Like a Vibrant on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra versus Vivid Colors on the X200 Pro. Personally, neither of them are my favorites, mainly because I prefer natural colors. At this point, if you've seen any of my videos, you probably know that. But the way things work on the Xiaomi is a little bit different from the Vivo. So here's the thing, the Xiaomi gives you Leica Authentic, which is very stylized, very high contrast, and kinda inconsistent. The X200, it gives you both a textured mode, which is exactly what you're seeing here. Again, very stylized, and I kinda like the way it looks here. It is maintaining the highlight perfectly. It is similar in terms of the contrast and the look of the image. Maybe a little too dark, but well, the fact is this textured mode is supposed to look that way. And Leica Authentic kind of looks similar in that regard, but what I like to use more than anything else is of course Zeiss natural colors. Personally, one of my all-time favorites, and I think Vivo has really fine-tuned Zeiss natural colors this time around, because the contrast that we get is very good. But the fact is this, sometimes Leica Authentic will produce images that look stunning. They're gonna look like some of those beautifully edited and color graded images that you see on Instagram from professional photographers. But there are also gonna be a fair number of times when it's just gonna be inconsistent. It's good that they have these really nice and stylized looks. Like a Vibrant and Leica Authentic, very good, keep those. But also provide us with perhaps a default option that basically gives you a balanced approach, very similar to what Zeiss natural colors does. I'm hoping that Xiaomi could maybe provide us with something similar in this case, maybe like a balanced, something along those lines, But here's the thing, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, as I mentioned previously, has a 1-inch sensor, but the problem is you can't really get proper good main camera close-ups. It's a bit disappointing on the Xiaomi that you can't really take advantage of that hardware. And even when you're indoors, the Xiaomi is most definitely capable of producing some absolute bangers, without a doubt. But it's not consistent. That's a real issue here. Like, if you want consistent and basically well-balanced shots every single time, and you don't really care about the stylized look that the Xiaomi provides, it doesn't really have a proper alternative. The inconsistency is really what Xiaomi suffers from more than anything else, and the X200 basically solves it by literally giving you 3 different options. But of course, one of the biggest concerns about the Vivo X200 Pro is that it has a smaller main camera. So in this particular case, we are indoors, so the lighting isn't perfect, and well, couldn't be a better time to crop in and check out those details, right? And to be honest, I'm not seeing enough of a difference here. Even when we're indoors, we don't have perfect lighting, and the sensors on both phones have to depend on their light gathering capacity to produce good, low noise, high detail results. We are not seeing enough of a difference here. So maybe it's not that big of a deal. But of course, we'll get to the 2x sensor crop. I think that's where, if there's any realistic problem, we're gonna see it right there. However, another thing that you just really need to bear in mind when it comes to these two particular smartphones is that the Xiaomi 14 Ultra's dynamic range is not nearly as good as the Vivo X200 Pro. It's just not even close. It should be plenty obvious right here. There's no doubt about that. But of course, what about the ultra-wide cameras? I'm gonna keep this very simple. It is very similar in terms of how they perform. The only advantage that I feel the Xiaomi 14 Ultra has is in the simple fact that it has not just a wider field of view, but also one of the widest field of views when it comes to ultra-wide cameras, which really makes it fantastic of a camera. And there's also the fact that the Xiaomi's detail preservation with the ultra-wide, despite having such a wide field of view, is very good. It's basically just as good as the X200 Pro, so the wider field of view is a huge advantage. But of course, similar to the main cameras, you are gonna see a very similar issue with dynamic range, and highlight preservation is really the one that's dragging it down at this point. I think it really needs an improvement. If Xiaomi can improve the highlight preservation, a massive problem will be solved in both the main and the ultra-wide cameras. And then we've got macro photography. So here's the deal. The Xiaomi 14 Ultra can get a little bit closer, and it looks a little bit more like a macro shot as opposed to the X200 Pro. But that is not where the X200 Pro stops, because what Vivo has done is basically incorporate a 2x sensor crop on top of what is possibly one of the, if not the highest quality telephoto camera in the history of mankind. It looks stunning, alright? I like how the Xiaomi looks, but the X200 Pro is better, without a doubt. And now the zoom test with the 2x sensor crop. Usually I don't care much about the 2x sensor crop, but in this particular case, in this particular comparison, it is the most important one. We also took these shots indoors, which means not perfect sunlit or daylight conditions. Therefore, if there is genuinely a problem with the sensor size, we're gonna see it right here. And so cropping into 500%, well, it would appear that most definitely the X200 Pro doesn't have as much detail. Now, oddly enough, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra also seems to be sharpening things a little bit. It usually doesn't, because I can see some sharpening artifacts, but still, it has more detail. So I think we can finally confirm that even though in regular main camera shots we didn't see a difference in detail preservation, with the 2x sensor crop specifically, there's definitely more detail on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Now, is that because of the sensor? I'm going to assume it is, because that's the only real disparity here. But let's face it, this is definitely an interesting finding. I feel like we are kind of steering towards a third option that I mentioned, but there are a few other things that we need to check out. First and foremost, we got to address the other telephoto cameras, right? So this is 3x on the Xiaomi versus 3.7x on the Vivo. And cropping in all the way, I think this is to be expected. With just the sheer quality of the telephoto camera that we have on the Vivo, it's obvious that it is pulling ahead. It's obvious that it has a higher quality. But what about the 5x on the Xiaomi? It is very high quality, at least as per my experience. And on the Vivo, on the other hand, we have to actually crop in from the 3.7x digitally to 5x, and then we'll crop in further to check out details. And you know what? It's very, very close. Now, you may think initially, especially if you're looking at this on a smartphone, you may think that the Xiaomi 14 Ultra has more detail. But trust me when I say, looking at this on a larger display with the full quality, no YouTube compression, I can tell you this much. The Xiaomi 14 Ultra has more contrast. It is also completely messing up the white balance, which is why it looks kind of unrealistic. The Vivo is the one with the realistic colors, but in terms of details, because it has higher contrast, you will probably perceive more detail on the Xiaomi. However, I'm of the opinion that if you can perceive more detail, then it is just more detail, isn't it? And then high resolution. Now this is going to be another area where we can test out exactly how well that main camera sensor can perform. Because you see, I once again took these shots in kind of the shadows, like the subject is kind of in the shadow. It's very late during sunset, so once again we really are pushing the prospect of the sensors utilizing their entire capacity for light gathering. And yes, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra actually has better detail preservation. So under challenging circumstances, I think we can definitively confirm the fact that because the Vivo X200 Pro has a lower quality sensor, it actually suffers in both the 2x sensor crop and in high resolution, which, well, that is disappointing to say the least. Now, I still haven't wrapped my head around exactly what to conclude in that regard, but we'll get to that at the end. But before that, of course, we gotta check out the ultra-wide high-res. Now, honestly, I don't really see a lot of people using high-res with the ultra-wide cameras. At least personally, I never use it. But well, we still gotta check out the details, right? And cropping all the way in, there's obviously the whole field of view disparity. The Xiaomi 14 Ultra way wider than anything else I've ever used this year, at least. And to be honest, the detail preservation is very similar. Once again, I think the Xiaomi's ultra-wide by default pulls ahead simply because it can not only preserve as much detail as the Vivo X200 Pro, it can also give you a wider field of view. So naturally, it deserves a win in that regard. And then of course the telephoto cameras, we gotta check out how these babies can perform with high res. And while cropping into 500% with 50 megapixels on the X200 Pro, I'd say both are taking a different approach, because what I can see is some smearing and lack of detail in various small fine textures on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, but that does look really natural in terms of the way the detail is being presented to us. On the Vivo, on the other hand, we have a lot more sharpening going on. We can see definitively a lot more artifacts because of that, but we can also see more detail. In a lot of the bricks, the finer details in the textures and stuff like that, it's much more visible as opposed to the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, where most of it is kind of lost because there's no sharpening. I kind of prefer the Xiaomi 14 Ultra here because I prefer the natural approach. I don't like over sharpening all that much, personally speaking. Now obviously the X200 Pro has a 200 megapixel mode, while the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, it has that 5x telephoto camera, or periscope camera rather. And well, there's only one way to find out if the 200 megapixels actually produces a better shot, or is it the 5x? And once again, very similar in terms of the approach here, because the X200 has more detail, but it also has way more sharpening and processing going on. I once again personally prefer the Xiaomi 14 Ultra's much more natural approach over here. And now when it comes to selfies, so look, it's just let me give you some context. I just checked out the few selfies and selfie portraits that I took, and here's the thing. In the previous comparison where I compared the Vivo X200 Pro versus the Oppo Find X8 Pro, well, every single selfie and basically every single selfie portrait was absolutely horrendous from the X200 Pro. They were either blown out highlights or it just didn't look right. It's just a lot of problems. We covered that. If you don't believe me, by all means check it out. But here's the thing. In this comparison against the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, a lot of these selfies, by the way, were taken at the exact same time as I did with the Find X8 Pro's comparison. But the fact is this, for some reason, probably because the X200 Pro really wanted to screw with me, it decided to give us near perfect selfies every single time. Whether it's the regular selfies or selfie portraits, like look at it, it came out looking beautiful. Like I have no problems here. If anything at all, I think the selfies came out looking nicer than the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, because a lot of the times the contrast is balanced much better, which did not happen in the previous comparison. So God, I'm flabbergasted over here. It's just, why? What even happened in the previous one with the selfies then? At this point, it just begs the question, right? Are the selfies good or are they bad? We don't know, because two different comparisons give completely different results. It just makes no sense. Oh, another thing, by the way, I didn't really mention this in the previous comparison, but the X200 Pro doesn't really have night selfies anymore, because they basically made this new mode, which is called landscape mode. That's supposed to be the new night mode. It's supposed to combine certain features and so on and so forth. It improves the night mode a lot. We'll get to that. But yeah, we don't get regular night selfies anymore. Not that it matters a lot, because as you can tell, as long as you have certain amount of light, you're gonna get a good result anyways. And also night selfies on the X100 Pro and the X100 Ultra, the previous generations, they sucked balls. So the fact that they removed the feature doesn't really take away from anything, but it surprises me that they took away the feature instead of actually improving it. Anyways, let us now move on to portrait mode. So the Xiaomi 14 Ultra takes a very interesting approach in the way it does portrait modes. Basically, it has the Leica portraits and the master portraits. Now, the master portrait will give you slightly lower contrast and maybe slightly safer results, but personally speaking, at least for my personal taste, I kind of like Leica portraits a little bit more, because it gives us high contrast, kind of a punchy look. But the problem is this: just like with Leica Authentic and Leica Vibrant, when you're taking regular normal photos, you don't have a proper default balanced mode, and because of that, the inconsistency with the portrait mode on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra is very high, and that's really not something you want, especially in this day and age, because most smartphones these days, whether it's the Vivo X200 Pro or even the Oppo Find X8 Pro, all of them can produce very consistent and very good portraits almost 100% of the time. It's gotten to the point that you can almost get perfect results. That's quite something. The Xiaomi is very far behind in that regard. Because I'm not gonna lie, there are certain instances when the Xiaomi 14 Ultra's portrait mode just looks stunning. Like, look at some of these telephoto or zoomed in portraits. It looks insane with the contrast. Exactly the kind of shot that I'd want personally, because I love high contrast. The X200 Pro on the other hand, its default color profile is perfectly consistent and you know exactly what you're gonna get. But it also provides you with like 20 different color options right there. Like, if you tamper with the settings enough, you could get exactly the kind of shot that the Xiaomi is producing, or at least like close enough. But if you want something nice and safe, if you want something very consistent, you have that option as default on the X200 Pro, and I think that is very important for a lot of people. That is basically what Xiaomi needs to improve upon, because the stylistic options, they're all there, and that's great. I love that fact, but you need balance as well. You need a little bit of both. And right here, obviously, we have the night portraits, which, honestly, there's nothing much to say here, except for the fact that, yeah, the warmth you see on the X200 Pro, very accurate. The Xiaomi is kind of removing it a little too much, but yeah, outside of that, nothing really going on here. Both phones can produce really nice night portraits. And that is the perfect segue, of course, to night mode. Now, here's the deal. When it comes to regular night mode shots with the main camera, you're not gonna have any problems. It's that simple. Yes, there is a sensor disparity. Yes, the X200 Pro has a smaller sensor, but it makes no difference. I checked the details on multiple shots, exact same across the board. There's literally no difference between the two, which is a good thing, because the Xiaomi's night mode is one of my all-time favorites, mainly because of the way it processes colors. The detail preservation was always good, and the X200 Pro also has no issues with detail preservation, just to be very clear on that regard. However, one thing that I'm pretty sure you've noticed at this point is that with Leica Authentic, the Xiaomi's night mode is one of the absolute best, and it looks stunning, to say the least. It's so realistic. It looks exactly like you would want a night mode shot to look like. Highly detailed, very nice, but also maintains the contrast, maintains all that shadow, maintains that look and exposure of nighttime really well, especially the night skies. Bloody amazing. But at the same time, you are probably also noticing that the X200 Pro is very similar to the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Not quite as dark with the shadows, not quite as realistic with the night mode, especially with the night sky, but it is very close. This is an all-time first for the X200 Pro. To this date, every single Vivo flagship that I've ever used, I've had this one singular complaint about night mode. It's very good, very high quality, but it always gives you just insane brightness, and it just doesn't look that nice. It doesn't even look like night mode a lot of the times, or rather it didn't used to, because now it very much does. All of these shots came out looking so beautiful and exactly like the kind of night mode shots you'd want. It's a bit more balanced in terms of, in maintaining certain degree of shadow detail, whether it's with the main camera or with the ultra-wide camera. It's a very similar story. Hell, if anything at all, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra may be going a little too far with the ultra-wide camera, specifically when it comes to crushing the shadows. And perhaps in an effort to try and maintain the realistic look of nighttime, it kind of goes a little too far. So technically speaking, with the ultra-wide camera, except for certain instances at least, I actually preferred how the X200 Pro was balancing things out, but that's the key. The X200 Pro finally gives you properly balanced realistic night mode shots. That's a big deal. Couple that with the fact that even though it has a smaller sensor, it doesn't actually suffer from low detail. That's quite something. But then of course, zoom at night. See, if there's ever going to be a place where the X200 Pro sensor causes it to suffer in the details, it would be the 2x sensor crop at night, wouldn't it? Because in daylight it suffered, so it is very reasonable to think that it would suffer at night as well. Turns out not really, because the night mode processing on the X200 Pro is both really good, and the detail preservation of the Xiaomi 14 Ultra is also not quite that good when it comes to the 2x sensor crop at night, which is why it's very similar across the board. There is maybe a touch more sharpening on the X200 Pro, especially if you look at the upper edges, but it's a very minor difference. Now, when it comes to the 3x telephotos, there are two things that I would like to point out. First and foremost, very realistic with regards to the way the night sky looks on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. The X200 Pro is very close, but it isn't quite up there in terms of realism. But also notice, in the night sky, we have a less reflection happening on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, which is alright. Sure, it's a problem. But also notice, if you look really close on the X200 Pro, there is a certain portion of the night sky where you can kind of see the smeared up lens reflection. It's basically being processed out of the X200 Pro's final image. It's just a very interesting find. I mean, that's really all there is, but of course, cropping in, and I think this was obvious, the X200 Pro has ton more detail as opposed to the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. But what I'm interested in is, of course, the 5x. Because at 5x, the Xiaomi does have the optical zoom, the Vivo does not. It has to rely entirely on processing and digital zoom. But cropping all the way in, there's two major issues on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, which you can probably tell. Not only does it have less detail, but it is also suffering from smearing. Out of I think the 5 or 6 shots that I took, this is the least amount of smearing that I could manage. So I don't really know why such an issue still exists on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, but it's definitely a disappointment because it really makes the 5x kind of unusable, because if you have smearing, then what's the point, right? Alright, that brings us to the end of this insane comparison, to be entirely honest. But here's the thing, we confirm the facts, right? Because with the main camera, the 12 megapixel mode specifically, when you're taking regular daylight shots or the night mode shots, no issues with the detail preservation whatsoever. Even though there's a massive sensor disparity between the two, I'm guessing the software is more than capable enough of keeping up. But when you think about the 2x sensor crop, only in daytime for some very odd reason, but yeah, daytime 2x sensor crop, and also the high-res 50 megapixel main camera shots, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra definitely had much higher detail. So considering all of that, I think we should put this in the concern department. Like, yeah, there is a concern with detail preservation in those two areas specifically, at least as per this camera comparison. But is it going to affect regular use case on a regular basis, like when you're taking normal photographs? I don't think it will, because even when I take photographs, I tend to scrutinize a lot, and as long as the main camera shots, both with daylight and with the night mode shots, they don't really have any issues. Even the night mode 2x sensor crop had no issues for some odd reason. Well, I don't really mind it. Now, is it a deal breaker? No, that's basically what I'm trying to get at. It is not a deal breaker, at least not in my opinion. But it is still extremely disappointing that Vivo, of all companies, would do something like this. Why downgrade the sensor of your main camera of all phones? If anything, we should have seen a massive upgrade. We should have seen them utilize the experience that they built with the 3.7x sensor and the software processing that goes with it, and the amount of detail preservation that we saw right here. We should have seen that translated into the main camera as well, but it's the exact opposite of what we should have gotten, which again makes no sense. I don't know why that happened, but yeah, that's the way it is. Now, of course, these are my thoughts, my personal thoughts. I would love to know what you guys think, what you feel about this whole situation. Like, are you really bothered by the fact that the 2x isn't as good as it should be? I'm sure you're bothered, but is it a deal breaker? Like, if you were considering the X200 Pro and these two areas were the issues, does it really just make you think you're not gonna buy it? That's what I want to know. But yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow with many more camera comparisons. Cheers.